All right, I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to turn this on
Somebody gave them, but they're flat. I'm talking about
just to give people a chance here.
like caramel flavored water and sugar.
So we're going to at least get this started just so people can jump in here.
He didn't go to lunch till 11:20, so he'll be here about 12:20.
He likes to make
Yeah.
a nice late entrance here. All right, I'm going to make sure that we are for sure streaming. If anybody is on here, they can definitely hear us, I think. Okay, yep, don't want to hear myself. That's for sure. All right, so we will do kind of the same thing as last week. We'll open it for anybody who's joining online, anybody who, if a question comes up in here, there are seriously no stupid questions at all. I just want this to be a time that people can kind of jump on here and be able to interact, like some of the questions that we talked about before we started the live stream. We can definitely go through, because I know there's some confusion as far as some of the routes that I was trying to go, which is to be expected anytime that I'm involved in any of this. To try to take whatever is mumbo jumbo up here and like express it to anybody in a room is a miracle. So the fact that questions come out are for sure to be expected. But while we are doing this, I'm just going to remind people, if you are joining us online, make sure to check in with us. Let us know you're here. We definitely want this to be something that we can interact back and forth with y'all. So join us in the conversation. If you got questions or you got comments, or we look really silly on the screen or something, we don't realize it, please just let us know, and that'll help us kind of do that. But how's y'all's day going? Good. We have some extra guests in the room, so just go around and just introduce yourself with a name, and that way, if they can't see you or they're just listening, because I know some do that, they know who's at least speaking. So.
Okay, Scotty, I'm here every week, so I'm the one he doesn't like talking to.
No, that's not true at all. That is not true. Although what is true is I was convinced that you absolutely hated me at first.
What makes you change from that?
Well, no, you didn't let me finish. Now I for sure know that you do. So, that's that. But all right, Scott, thanks for joining us. Kathy Parks. We are very excited to finally have someone, much prettier in this room than
That would be anybody,
the people who are normally here. So we're excited about that.
You brought the ugly half.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Go ahead and introduce yourself, ugly half.
Joe Parks.
All right, Joe, this is your second of hopefully many times joining us this week, for this lunchtime live stream. I've also decided, by the way, I'm going to put out an application for somebody to apply to come and be the host. That's what I need. I need somebody to come in and rein this thing in, to speak to the people and to just ask me questions and to tell me when to shut up.
Okay, Wade's not here, so I bought him. Wade's the guy. Second,
Oh, man. It's going to be Wade. Actually, that would probably be a good idea. We could do that. All right, so we've got a couple people who are on here. Make sure, again, if you just signed on, make sure you interact with us. Let us know that you're here. And otherwise, we'll just kind of communicate back and forth here in the room until somebody out there decides they want to jump in here. So obviously, we were talking before we went live about a question that you had about some clarification that you wanted with regards to Sunday night's class on Joseph. So go ahead and...
All right, so the other night we were talking about favorite sons, I guess, and you mentioned that Jesus was the second son. I think that's what I got out of it. Noah, I guess, was the first son, and that we were talking about whether the first son or second son had preferential treatment, I guess, and the second son usually dies, I guess. It was okay. So I wanted to make sure everyone
was
got
clear
the
as
same
far
thing
as what
I
that
did,
went.
'cause I was unclear, totally unclear.
Yep, I understand that. So what this is actually it's what's called a motif. in music, it would be like a melody. Like if you, okay, let's go off on a rabbit hole real quick. I'm a big movie and music type person, and there's a movie that came out several years ago called The Holiday. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a chick flick, like a rom-com type thing. Anyways, there's the composer of it. His name is Hans Zimmer, and he does a lot of really famous popular movies. But one of the things that I really liked about this movie was not so much the storyline, but that you can almost know what's happening in the movie just by listening to the musical score on the screen. What he did was he created a melody for every character in this rom-com. And when they were on screen, he plays with that melody, interchanging it with some of the other characters in the movie. So you don't even have to see the screen to know which characters are kind of on the screen at that moment. And then he'll take that melody and he'll speed it up or slow it down depending on the type of emotion that you want to do. It's a musical term. It's a motif, basically. If you're more familiar with, did you ever watch the Pixar movie, or I think it's Pixar, Up, several years ago? Okay, go home and watch it. Just so you know, the first like 7 minutes of the movie is like the saddest like opening to a movie I've ever seen in my life. But it is all about they visualize this older man's life and how he falls in love and gets married, and then they have kids, and all. It's like a big picture of what happens there, and then his wife dies. At the spoiler alert, his wife dies during this montage, but the composer of the music for that does the exact same thing. He takes this like lower level melody, and then he plays with it all throughout this montage, and then it comes back all the way around to when she dies, and he plays it like slowed down and like in a minor notes and things like that, and it just, by the time you hit that, you're bawling 7 minutes into a movie that you couldn't have cared less about 7 minutes ago. The reason I say that is because this is a really good picture of what happens in Scripture. They will begin to create a melody in a theme, and so you'll get the Cain and Abel narrative, and you'll see the very first interactions of siblings. And this is going to create a melody. And then what's going to happen is now from here on out, they're going to take this sibling motif and play with it from all angles. But somehow, they don't even have to all be siblings. For instance, one of the second parts of the sibling motif are actually Abram and Lot, which is his nephew. It's not even a sibling. But it's the same melody somehow because they're kind of going through the same thing, and then you'll keep going down. You'll see Jacob and Esau, and you got the 12 brothers, and you just keep, and then you get to Moses, and the whole point of the Moses sibling motif is who even is Moses' family. Like, he's not really Egyptian, he's not really Israelite, he's not belonging to any of these guys. So then you're going to see how the sibling motif works there, but it's the same melody, they've just shifted it slightly. And you can kind of, once you begin to recognize that, you start to read all of these different narratives different. So by the time you get to Jesus, you have heard this melody played every which way it could possibly be played. And so now Jesus will come, and he'll somehow tie everything up he'll bring an end to all of this melody in a way, or advance it even further. And so what I mean when I mean that this sibling rivalry motif, we have the instance, like starting from the beginning, we get Cain and Abel. And for some reason, Abel, who is the younger sibling, his offering is favored. He is blessed by the and while he father, it creates strife and struggle, and it's not that, and God kind of warns Cain, like, if you just do well, if you continue to control this, it's going to be fine. You're going to be elevated. Just like Abel was, you will also be elevated. But instead he doesn't control that beast. And now what you'll see is now every seed and sibling rivalry that's going to take place after this is going to be a play on all of these same melodies. And so by the time you get to Jacob and Esau, and the younger is favored, in a different way than Cain and Abel was, because the younger is actually favored by the mom this time, but yet the younger still gets the blessing from the father, but not in the way that it happened in Cain and Abel. He tricks the father into this blessing. And so now you've got just a slight variation in this same melody. And so by the time you get to Joseph, now we've got 12 siblings. And so it's now expanded. And you're going, oh my goodness, what's happening here? And then the 12 siblings become a nation, become the Israelites. So now those 12 siblings will become even greater. And it'll be about how these sibling tribes basically interact with each other, have favoritism, go in and out. You're still going to get the same micro picture of Cain and Abel, Cain murdering Abel. In the macro picture, when all the tribes almost wipe out all of the tribe of Benjamin at the end of Judges, it's a play on all these same motifs. But you don't recognize that if you're just reading about this instance, and you don't realize that this melody is playing in the background, because it's supposed to make you think like, okay, there's some sibling issues, there's sibling rivalries and this kind of thing. And hello, come on in. We have a seat for you right here. We are in the middle of clarifying some of the questions that we had as far as Sunday night goes with regards to sibling rivalries. And you haven't missed anything because I've blabbered on for a really long time about nothing. But it's important to know that this sibling rivalry thing is going to happen because it's set up in Genesis chapter 3:15 when it says that the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent will have enmity between each other until one day the offspring of one of them, the woman, will be the one who crushes the serpent, will end the problem, the issue from the start. And so when you see that and when you hear that, you're going to be filtering every narrative through this. Not that is Esau an actual snake, no. But are Esau's actions reflective more of, man going about things his own way, coming about wisdom and knowledge about their own ways, and how that leads to death and destruction. And on and on and on this melody is going to play until you get to the offspring of a woman, Jesus, who will come and be called the second Adam. So he's thematically the second born, the only begotten son of the Father. And then there's so many little intricate things that are woven into that theme, but it's also playing off of that same melody of what do we do when the father elevates up the younger sibling, and what does that mean for us when we read about the prodigal son, when we go back and look at the fact that the narrative doesn't end when the prodigal son returns. The narrative ends when the older son kind of throws a hissy fit, and the father's like, you've always been here. You've always had these blessings, bestowed upon you. You've always had access to this. And then that will play into themes of like, okay, well, what about Christians and Jews? And that's where you get into Romans, and Romans is like, don't hate on the Jews. Like that, they're the reason there is Christianity. Like they are the older sibling. And you're still hearing little bits of that melody, even though we're not siblings necessarily, even though we're not in the same families or whatever it may be. It's all patterns and motifs that are working their way through. And it makes you question, like, what does this mean for us now, and how we should be looking at other people and all that. Did that clarify? I'm not saying that Jesus is the younger sibling to anybody necessarily, but thematically, and when you look at the patterns, he is going to be considered the younger son who is blessed, and he's going to turn that theme upside down by being the blessed and favored one who is killed, ultimately by his older siblings. I mean, when you look at it, as far as the Jews who basically murder him, sentence him to death. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Another thing we were talking about prior to this, and something that I hadn't grasped, we were talking about that when you're reading the story, that Joseph is seen as, this is going to be this is who Jesus is going to come through his lineage, and it doesn't happen. So we were talking about that. I hadn't You had talked about it. I didn't recognize that, but
Yeah. It's a trick, and we're giving away a spoiler alert towards some of this, towards what we'll kind of get into in the future of this class. But Joseph is always remembered as like the good and faithful one. You know, he's the one who everything keeps happening. He still remains faithful to God. God obviously honors that situation and elevates him in Egypt, and there's all this kind of stuff. And it leads to the salvation of his brothers in a famine. And the way the end of Genesis puts it, literally the salvation of the world is how they put it. And so then you're left going, okay, cool. Like, there we go. The seed of the woman who did it right? He's really kind of blameless in most of all this. Except that he's in the wrong land with the wrong people, and he marries the wrong she's a priestess or daughter of a priest or priestess, I can't recall, but and has half Egyptian kids, and you go, that I don't think that was what was supposed to happen, and then cut to the Exodus 400 years down the road kind of thing. And you're supposed to go, oh no, what are we supposed to do there? And then you go, wait, something happens at the end of Genesis, and you realize it's not even through Joseph that the Savior's going to come. So who's it going to be? Well, hard right turn, Judah. And you go, wait, what? Like, how does this work? And what you're doing is it's constantly what the Bible's doing. It's turning everything that we would, like if we were to go, okay, God, yeah, clearly it's going to be through the lineage of Joseph that Jesus is going to come. And God's going to go, nope. It's actually going to be through the one who slept with his daughter-in-law who, and had twins and whose kids were killed, which we'll get to in the future. But and you go, wait, what? So then it makes you begin to it sort of makes you just begin to question everything. Like what is up is down and down is up, and I don't understand this at all. God, you clearly don't know what you're doing because you should have went through Joseph, right? And when you get to that mindset, then you're forced to read this narrative totally different, because if I were to ask you, should you ever sell your brothers into slavery? Hard pass, no, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong, ethically wrong. But it led to the salvation of all of Egypt and the world. So is it as hard of pass of wrong as you thought it was? And if it's not, then it makes you go, okay, what is right? And that's where we get the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures that says there's nothing wrong. There's nothing right. It's all wrong because it's not as it was at the beginning, good. We're headed that way, but we will never be able to do it. We can't. Humans will always pick even what they think is right is wrong most of the time, and it leads to calamity and chaos and destruction unnecessarily. And so, but yet we often will look at this and be like, let's pick out all the leadership qualities of Joseph, which is true and it's good. I just kind of giggle at it because the point of it was that, like, he still failed. He was still a failure. Everyone who is we look up to in the Bible. You've heard that old saying. Everyone we look up to the Bible murdered and were adulterers and lied and ran from God. And yeah, they're all human. And all the bad guys, guess what? They're also human. And so, yeah.
So another thing that we talked about, and I know I'm doing all the asking, and if they've got questions, just tell me to shut up. If anybody else, we talked about the timeline of so you had the beginning, then you had the Noah and his bunch, you had the flood. This was the next event after the flood and then Exodus is really the next thing after the Joseph.
So you want to know chronologically, like,
yes,
how this happened, when it happened.
Yes.
And traditionally speaking, it would have been creation, flood. At some point, flood happens, recreation through Noah. Somewhere down the line in his descendants, you get Babel and Abraham, and then through Abraham, his lineage. And so we're right over here. Come on, Wade. You showed up late, so now you got to sit in the front.
Yeah. By the way, you're the new MC. Adam was looking for somebody since you weren't here.
I said I need a host, somebody to just tell me to stop or clarify when I'm not being clear. But yeah. So this is somewhere down the line, post flood. historically. Does that answering
Yes.
your question? Does that make
Well,
sense?
we had already talked about it.
Yeah.
That was clear, but someone else might have had that, where exactly are we
Yeah.
in the timeline, so that's why I asked that.
Genesis traditionally is thought to be in a chronological order,
Okay.
and so
And Genesis is also thought to be written by Moses, which this is way years later. So these stories probably were put down by someone else, and he's probably put them together.
yeah. So this we've talked about this in the past, but it's a good time to clarify again for anybody who maybe didn't get this. But authorship back then didn't exactly work the same way that we think of authorship now. Authorship now, if I say Wade Washburn wrote a book, either he wrote a book or he used somebody who sat next to him and helped him formulate thoughts into words. Writing developed, alphabets developed. Not everybody had that ability to be educated to write things down. There wasn't, things came through stone or clay into papyrus, into animal skin, type thing. And so all that stuff happened over a long period of time, so that you get Genesis through Deuteronomy, who traditionally is written by Moses, and everybody kind of agrees with that. But it doesn't mean that there weren't people who, over time, as Moses experienced the events and literally writes them down as God says to, like he does in the narrative where Moses is holding up his hands and Aaron and them are holding up their hands for the war. Afterwards, he says, write this down so that people can read this in the future and be, reminded of this event. So he clearly does that. But you get to the end of I'll just show you because this is the best way to do it, I think. If you get to the very end of Deuteronomy, okay, apparently we don't want to show, there we go. We get to the end of Deuteronomy, and it says, Deuteronomy 34. You can just look at the title right there immediately and see it says the death of Moses. So Moses goes up and he dies. He passes everything on to Joshua, the son of Nun. He was full of the spirit and wisdom. And then Moses had laid his hands on him, and so the people obeyed him and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there's not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, who knew the Lord face to face, or saw the Lord face to face. None like him, for all signs and wonders and the Lord had sent him to do. What comes to mind when you read that paragraph?
Joshua.
Okay, Joshua. So you think maybe Joshua picked up the pen and maybe wrote this part down?
I always thought so.
Mhm.
I thought that he was led by God to put this last chapter to tie it up.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Well, Aaron was still around, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
He was like second in command,
Right.
Yep.
I guess.
That is a possibility. When it says there's not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, what does that mean in like period of time in your opinion? Like, does that feel like not a very long period of time? Does it feel like a pretty long period of time?
Well, then there was plenty of prophets after that,
Mhm.
but I would say that was a pretty recent, not too much time passed from his death to this, to Joshua.
So if he were to say, like, if Moses died a year ago, and he were to say, there's not been a prophet since, is that going to hold as much, weight behind it as if it were decades, or even if it were, a century later?
Well, the other part of that, it said nobody else knew the Lord face to face. So is that what it's talking about? And there hadn't been a prophet that has seen God, because supposedly, you go blind or you die or something, did you see God?
Mhm.
So there hasn't been one since, so.
So there are for sure various forms of thought. Obviously, we all agree Moses didn't write that. It doesn't say that Joshua wrote it necessarily. One could ascertain that maybe he did at some point. Could have been later on in his life he wrote that down. But if you read the Old Testament in the way that the Israelites or the ancient Jews lay it out, it's in the Tanakh, what you'll see is that they have created these little bookends in between the various sections. So the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, which is like, it's just slightly different from ours. So it's not like the minor prophets are kind of thrown into like the teachings, or the histories aren't exactly what we're thinking of. So what they do is they actually create seams between these. So it'll say there hasn't arisen a prophet since then, and then it'll go to Joshua and be like, you know what, but there was this one guy. Or it'll jump ahead to Kings, and it'll begin to talk about a different prophet who lived. And what it seems like over a long period of time, as scribes were writing this down and they were creating more and more copies of this, that scribes would input maybe a commentary or something that they had read in a different one or something, and maybe they'll even put it off into like a kind of a side area of the scroll. But then the next one who writes this down is like, oh, I think that belonged in here, and then he'll write that in under there. And it's basically a way of taking something that was kind of choppy and maybe put together, and then kind of creating something more cohesive and beautiful. Now, this gets really, really tricky when it comes to your definition of what inspiration is. Most people, without maybe speaking this out loud, will say inspiration is more like the golden tablets fell out of heaven type of understanding, right? But I like to take it to Jesus. John 1. John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God, he was in the beginning with God. We then, a little bit later in that same chapter, he ascribes that Jesus is the Word. The Word become flesh. We have no problem ascribing to Jesus that he is fully God and yet fully man, which means he experienced all the hardships of man, but also was fully God. He was the only one who could be fully God and fully man. I would ascribe that inspiration and the Word it's Jesus. So in the process of how human authors will put things together over time, that is oral tradition, we'll speak it around campfires for centuries, and to written tradition, somebody will finally go, you know what, we should write this stuff down. That way we could see this even better. Into scribes beginning to formulate and bring all these books together into, as they're writing them, scribes will add or take away certain things. I know that's a hot topic situation, but for me, I think this proves that it could only truly be done by God. Because the moment you add one single tiny extra element into all of these little facets, the fact that you have a cohesive story from beginning to end is just astronomically impossible. And so inspiration is a process. It was not a moment. And in that human process, you get things like Deuteronomy 34, that clearly we all ascribe that Moses wrote the Torah, but something seems to be added here. In fact, there's a famous story to also just kind of cherry on top of this. There's a famous story about, I can't remember which prophet it is, but it's Baruch who's his scribe. I think it's Ezekiel. Ezekiel was the preacher. Ezekiel, so for like 20 years, he's been preaching these oracles. And God tells him to get Baruch, a scribe, to write it all down. So Baruch spends all this time and he writes the book of Ezekiel. And then the king of the time finds out that he's doing this and has him bring the book to the king, or the scroll to the king. And the king, while he's reading aloud, is tearing it up and throwing it in the fire. All this extra work. I mean, you can picture Baruch's like flesh just go white, He goes back to Ezekiel and goes, I don't have it anymore. Like, it's gone. All that work is done. He goes, all right, let's start again. And it literally says, I should just look this up so you can see it. It says that Baruch wrote down all of the words from the previous and then some more. And you're like, what do you mean? What do you mean he wrote more? What was in the last book? Okay. Baruch, Israelite scribe, in 2 Kings 24:18. Jerusalem's capture, Zedekiah reigns. Oh no, that's not what I want. You guys, you're welcome to ask questions while I'm doing this awesome thing. Host,
Well, I always felt that the first 5 books, well, it's attributed to Moses. A lot of it was he was depending on oral history.
Yes.
Like around the campfire, and then I feel like God either validated the oral history to put that event into the different books.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because when I write my family history, I'll put it aside and come back to it a year later, and I'll scratch out some stuff and I'll add more things because things come to mind, or something's been resolved, you know, and
Yeah.
so it's editing.
Yep.
You're editing the narrative.
This is this is something I wrote a long time ago in the front of my Bible, or whatever, kind of explains sort of how these collections came into being, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It kind of would happen with the events would happen, then there'd be oral traditions like what you're talking about, then there'd be early written traditions, and then early collections of those written traditions into kind of proto editions of the biblical books into the formed Tanakh, into the Old Testament. Now, this is all Old Testament. New Testament is totally different. It was written in such a short amount of time. It formulated in an incredible way, but different than this. So this is kind of how you get the Hebrew Bible. So this could have taken place over 1,000 years. It's hard to say. And it was Jeremiah, by the way, who wrote this. So Jeremiah 36, verse 4, it says, "Then Jeremiah called Baruch, the son of Neriah. Baruch wrote on a scroll and dictated Jeremiah all the words that the Lord had spoken to him. And Jeremiah ordered Baruch, saying, I'm banned from going to the house," right? And then Jehoiakim is the one who comes and is like, I want to hear this, let me see what's going on. And then at the end of it, it says, he sits down and reads it. Baruch read it to them. And then the official said to Baruch, "Go and hide." Goes into the court, brings the scroll. Okay. And now after the king had burned the scroll, the words of Baruch wrote at Jeremiah's dictation. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Take another scroll, write on it the form of words that were in the first scroll, which Jehoiakim, the son of Judah, had burned. And concerning Jehoiakim, son of Judah, you'll say this, right? Jeremiah took another scroll, verse 32, gave it to Baruch, the scribe, son of Neriah, who wrote on it and dictated Jeremiah all the words that the scroll Jehoiakim had burned in the fire, and many similar words that were added to them. And you're like, what do you mean by that? Like, what did he miss in the first ones? What does this mean? But to me, what this speaks is very much more of there's a human element to inspiration. And it's okay that the human element is there because it's still ultimately dictated by the divine element, the inspiration, the process. Which, when you see that, I mean, how many wars have you heard over what translation is most correct? When suddenly some of that pressure is removed from this, when you realize that it's allowed to be human, you're allowed to have, in this human book, human stuff, because the divine part is undeniable, right? That's the part that we can't argue, So whether it's, this version or that version being better or worse, it doesn't matter, because you can't deny the divine parts, the message, the meaning, all of that. Now, if you take the form of inspiration as like, King James only, or that there are no errors, that it's all perfect and that kind of thing, every jot and tittle, that's okay. Like, good. That's good. That's great. But if you stumble upon passages like Mark 16, that has in most Bibles little brackets that say, hey, you know what? The earliest versions of this passage don't include this. Then you don't have to have this, faith. Your faith doesn't have to go through this crazy, I don't know, what am I trying to say? You don't have to be fearful. Yeah, doubt. You don't have to be doubtful, because now you're reading this as a 16-year-old kid in high school going, I thought this was perfect. I thought, what does this mean? Well, is it any less perfect? No, it's just my definition of what inspiration is skewed towards something that it never claims to be. And so we can have faith in that kind of thing. Does that make sense to everyone?
Well, what is the controversy, when you see on YouTube different programs about the Book of Enoch
Mm-hmm.
and other things that the Great Council decided not to put in the Bible, and I haven't really studied it. I just know that there's a controversy. Some books
Mhm.
didn't make it in,
Mm-hmm.
and then lately I've been seeing a lot of stuff about Enoch,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I heard that it was like puff narrative.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
what I took away from what the presenter was saying. It was like puff narrative. It wasn't really
Yeah.
deep.
Yeah. So one, there's a lot to that particular statement. So first of all, when it came to the Council at Nicaea, and the different councils that talked about the formulation of the canon, it's not that they came together and were like, okay, I think this book should be in and this book should be out. It's more of they came together and there was the formulated scripture that basically formed itself ultimately over time. And then there were a couple of books like First, Second, Third Enoch, that they would go, that some of the churches, like especially in like the Egyptian, like Ethiopian area, they thought it should have been canonical. But the majority of the church outside of like that small subsect were all like, no, this is not canon, which means it's not inspired. It's not of God necessarily. However, where we trip up is where we suddenly throw that to the wind as if it weren't historical in some sense. I have a ladybug crawling on me, so there you go. It's weird. But, historical in some sense, or that it doesn't add any value. And what the book of First Enoch does is there is a growing number of rediscovery into a viewpoint of Genesis 6 with regards to the sons of God coming and seeing women, taking human women as their brides, and basically ultimately raping them and having these sons of God, Nephilim, these little G God, half-breed, whatever they are. Again, that's another rabbit hole we could take at some point. But for the better part of 600 years, everything had kind of shifted away from that supernatural viewpoint and more into like it was probably more like the godly line of Seth, who's versus the non-godly line of Cain, who have these children. Because there's a shifting narrative back towards that, and it kind of fills in a lot of the puzzle pieces and the breaks in our understanding with regards to like how did we come up with like Roman and Greek mythology or Norse mythology, and why are there so many different religions in the world, and how do we get to this point? Well, this kind of starts to fill in some of that gap. If you were to place a cosmic rebellion at the same time and alongside a human rebellion, and the cosmic rebellion takes place with people with beings that God placed over all of the nations when he separated them at Babel, then suddenly some of these things make sense. And all of the surrounding nations who claim that there's a reason why every ancient civilization, their kings were always, for some reason, descendants of the gods. Whatever their creation myth was, whatever it was, they were always somehow descendants of the gods, which made them more powerful, more rich, more whatever. Meanwhile, the Bible goes, yeah, that ended in mass chaos, death, and destruction, a decreation of everything through a massive flood. So that what you call good is actually not good. That is in First Enoch especially, which was rediscovered in 1947 during the rediscovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, kind of began to illuminate this Genesis 6 thing. Now, First Enoch is about the only one that most scribes or scholars, Hebrew scholars, accept as like, okay, this is for sure something that the Jews during Jesus' time believed. Second and third gets weird. It was written at a different period of time, and it's not written by the same author, and it's very, very out there, especially for me. In fact, if anybody wants to read Enoch, I wouldn't even go into it. It gets very strange.
So the first and second would be like from the Essenes?
Actually, that's only a very small part of what Enoch is. Enoch, there's probably one chapter is what you're talking about. And it does go more into the sons of God and everything.
Right.
The rest of it is what I will say with your study, like everything, this is represented going back to, and this book talks about this book. Enoch does not do that.
Yes.
Enoch
right.
is referenced once or twice, but
Right.
there is not this repetitive story about man's falling, and it doesn't do that.
Yep.
It's like a one-off.
Which is why you can see why, like, it was pretty much unanimous that everyone was like, yeah, this is not inspired. This is totally different. However, it is a reflection of beliefs of the time. So, for instance, there's a reason why you don't read about demons in the Old Testament. But when Jesus is there, they're all over the place. It seems like he's casting out demons all over the place, right? Why is that? Well, we have developed this theology that demons are the fallen angels. That's not what Jews believed then. Jews believed that they were the impure or unclean spirits of the offspring of this sons of God human Nephilim. So they die. Once something dies that was half immortal being, I don't really know. What does that mean? So they're basically bastard spirits of the fallen ones, is how they put it. Which is why they're constantly looking for a vessel. They want back into something. They want power. They want all that. So Jesus is going to come, and while he's preaching and teaching in the earth, he's also fighting a cosmic battle that you don't realize has been waging this whole time. And these demons are trying to get back into a physical form to fight the Son of God, who will come and who will retain all of the power that was given to them in the Old Testament. It now belongs to him, right? Which now you can go into all the world and undo Babel, which is ultimately what started this whole thing. If you read that Nimrod started it, and Deuteronomy says that when he divided up the nations according to the number of the sons of God. Again, it's massive, massive rabbit hole.
And in Revelation, it's talking about that the demon spirits that are now trapped will be
Loosed.
They'll be loosed upon the earth.
Peter and Jude both also quote, which is also why Enoch is important, because Peter and Jude also quote Enoch. And it talks about these are the spirits that are in Tartarus, in bondage right now, that Jesus actually went, while in the grave, went and preached to. And they were of the spirits, they were of the angels that did not keep their abode during the days of Noah, but came and did what they shouldn't have ever done during the days of Noah. So, which also, when you see this viewpoint, then you're going to read things like 1 Corinthians chapter 10, when Paul talks about, hey, and women, when you're in the church, like in the presence of angels, the messenger, you should cover yourself. You should wear a covering so that there's no temptation. And then he just moves on. He's like, just because of the angels. And then he moves on, like, what are you talking about? What do you mean, Paul? But for them in that culture, they would have immediately got, oh, yeah, well, we don't want to tempt another. Jesus already conquered all that. We don't want to tempt another fall. We don't, we want to be clean in all of this. And so, yeah.
So I didn't realize until recently that the Nephilim, that was a second fall from heaven. I always thought that the demons that Jesus was confronting and casting out were from Lucifer's gang. And
Which is a possibility.
And then so this second fall that produced the Nephilim, they're in that mix too? Possibly?
Yes. So there's a lot behind that too. And I do want to preface this with, if you believe that demons are fallen angels from the, casting out of the stars and from heaven and all that, that's okay. I don't think this is clear for a reason. I think that there's ambiguity in these readings because that wasn't what was important. The text is trying to hit, like, it's attempting to take care of many problems. And some of those problems are, while in ancient Babylon, in exile, Babylonians will be reading these narratives, right? And they're polytheistic and open to gods, right? But now if they're going to read this narrative and read that the things that they believe are actually really, really, really bad for the world, and then they put that in their own hearts and minds and look at the world and see what's happening as a result of their gods, that may draw them towards Nineveh repenting. Who knows? Maybe God will relent, you know. And so it's okay if you don't take the sons of God narrative like that. However, no matter what, the scripture is not as clear as we want it to be with regards to the fall of this Lucifer character. Most of this is based off of, you know, kind of one passage in Ezekiel that says, "I saw you fall like." Well, here, let's just go to it. I don't like misquoting things. I think it's Ezekiel 20. Yes, Ezekiel 28. It's a prophecy against the prince of Tyre. And what's going to happen is the writer is going to be speaking about something clearly human, but at some point, let's see if you notice a shift, okay? So the word of the Lord came to me, "Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre," a real place, a real king, a real ruler, "because your heart is proud and you've said, 'I am a god, I sit in the seat of gods, in the heart of the seas, yet you are but a man. You are no god.'" This is clearly a man, okay? "Though you make your heart like the heart of a god, you are indeed wiser than Daniel. No secret is hidden from you, but your wisdom and your understanding you have made wealth for yourself and have gathered gold and silver into your treasuries. By your great wisdom and your trade, you have increased your wealth. Your heart has become proud in your wealth. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, because you make your heart like the heart of a god," still talking about human, "therefore, behold, I will bring foreigners upon you, the most ruthless of nations. They'll draw swords against you, and your wisdom defile your splendor. They shall thrust you down into the pit. You shall die the death of the slain," which actually is the death of the slain is exactly what the men of renown, the men of the name, that's what they were known for. It's that they gave their all for the cause. The men of the name. They were such mighty warriors. Now they're going to die now this guy's going to die like the mighty warriors. "In the heart of the seas, will you say, 'I am God,' in the presence of those who kill you? Though, no, you're just a man, and no God, in the hands of those who slay you." Now it continues, verse 11. "Moreover, the word came to me, 'Son of man, rise, lament over the king of Tyre.'" He says this to the king of Tyre: "You were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God." The king of Tyre was in Eden? "Every precious stone was your covering." He's brilliant. He's shiny, which is the word nakash, the serpent, is a triple entendre that one means the shiny one. "Sardis, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, crafted in gold were your settings and your engravings. On that day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed the garden cherub." And you're left going, we're not talking about Tyre anymore. Who is he talking about? "I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones and fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as profane thing from the mountain, and I destroyed you, O guardian cherub. From the midst of the stones of fire, your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted wisdom." This is all nobody argues that this isn't about Satan, right? Everybody agrees, like, this is clearly about Satan. We take that, we read that into the bright and morning star that's cast out, takes a third of the angels in heavens. We kind of can fill in the blanks there. And that's where we get the picture of Lucifer. But there's other views with regards to what that is and how that is and why that is, and whether or not these fallen angels, how many falls there were. There's actually technically 3 cosmic rebellions and earthly rebellions. Eden, Noah, and Babel are all kind of the same setup from different points of view. So,
And in Revelation, it's talking about there's a spiritual battle being waged
right,
now, I guess.
right. There is definitely a cosmic rebellion.
First time I read that and listed all the stones, it came to mind the breastplate
Mm-hmm.
of the 12 stones that
Mhm.
over the priest.
Priests. Yep. Mm-hmm. What do they represent? The priests are representing creation, like the way it was, the good, right? And they will be the ones who will go into the presence of God, back to Eden. You know, the tabernacle and the temple are both set up to be miniature Edens, pointing back west because they're east of Eden. You know, all of those things, and so none of that's bad. It's all part of God's good creation. It's just a matter of when we take these things and we, like Daniel, who just heard about a dream made of a bunch of different stones and a cosmic rock that destroys it. So what does King Nebuchadnezzar do in the next chapter? I'm going to build a giant golden statue, you know? We're going to take these things that are gifts and precious and beautiful, and we're going to make them wage war and cause bloodshed and all that. Does that make sense? This is there could be whole classes taught on like these little passages that I'm talking about. So please this is not exhaustive in any way, but it kind of gives you a different viewpoint from some of the previous ones, if that makes sense. Anyways, Enoch can be valuable, but it's not scripture. Like everybody agrees, this is not scripture. It may give us a viewpoint of what was believed to have happened, but it's not the point. Otherwise, I think God would have clarified that.
Just kind of fills in the gap of our understanding,
Yeah.
the back shading or the.
It's kind of a commentary on cultural legends,
Uh-huh.
and I can see it. Like, I can read a lot of it and see how there was probably some reality in a lot of it.
In third Enoch, he's not even called Enoch.
Mm-mm.
He's called,
Well, he becomes an angel.
what's he called?
Not
Melchizedek.
no.
Like the Transformer.
It's
What's
weird.
the leader of the
Yeah, it's
Transformer?
weird. Yes, it is. It is. It's just like that too.
Uh,
Megatron?
Megatron. It is. That's his name. That's really what it becomes.
So you're up on the Transformers, huh?
It is. It becomes that. Yeah. He becomes a god, which is that to me that gets weird. That gets weird. But anyways,
We're
Too
still
many
stuck in Miss
mushrooms,
Rachel
huh?
right now.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, we are quiet on the Western Front, but we do have quite a few people watching. So hopefully, if anybody's out there and you are there, say hi to us.
I'd like to know what they're
Me too.
getting. I'm getting my questions answered. If you've got questions, ask.
Yeah, please do. Emily Moore says hi. Hello, Emily. It's so much nicer having people in this room, by the way. Any other questions before we?
The Book of McAfee,
Mm-hmm.
that's another one that's like
Yeah. Yep. So that's in the Catholic canon,
They
basically.
say it's a good history.
Yes.
Because it's written by Josephus, I guess,
Right.
but it's not wholly inspired.
Correct.
According to the.
Correct. Jubilees is another one. There's quite a few of those that are.
So the translation that we have of the scrolls, who decided who was gonna be the ones to write this stuff down?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
This is why what becomes a test of people's faith for me it finally made sense to me, I guess I should say, because the moment you begin to say Moses wrote all this, one would only need to go, okay, we'll prove Moses ever existed to really bring into question all this, right? but for me to look at this and to discover how cohesive and how perfect this all is, and to realize that, yeah, this was formed over a long period of time, and God still managed to, like, we all have the bare bones of everything that God wanted us to see in this, and is astounding to me. So there's going to be times where God says in here, write this down, Baruch, write this down, Moses, write this down. But then there's other times that you don't know. You're not given these. Corinthians is another one. Like, in 1 Corinthians, he's like, when I wrote to you previously, the other letter, you're like, wait, so 1 Corinthians actually 2 Corinthians, and 2 Corinthians actually 3 Corinthians. What do we do with that? Well, apparently that wasn't something that was meant to be here. And so now you get to spend a lifetime going, okay, why these? And it becomes pretty clear, I think, the more and more you study that
that document
undeniable.
may have not survived since
Mhm.
it was passed around and from one community to another. I
Yeah.
find it amazing that all these scrolls and everything, clay tablets, whatever, survived how they did.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that council got together, is to be able to bring them all
Mhm.
together and say, we have got a giant mess here that we need to,
Mm. Well, and I do want to make very, very clear, we don't have a single original document. Not one. We don't have a single original document of any of the Bible. For many, that becomes bothersome. But for me, it makes total sense. In fact, I wish I need a whiteboard. That's okay. I've shown this to these guys before, and I'll just do it on this. And the reason why this is absolutely had to be divine, knowing that we don't have the original document at all, is this. So, like, if I were to say, Wade, I'm picking on you since you're our host, right? If I were to write a statement, Wade ate for lunch. Okay, here we go. This is my statement. You guys understand? Wade ate, and there's, for those who can't see, it says blank for lunch.
Sandwich.
Yeah, we could fill it in. I could say sandwich. It could be whatever. Right. Then we discover, 200 years down the road, somebody discovers another note that says, Wade blank, we'll say sandwich. I like that. However you spell sandwich, for lunch. Okay, so can we take those two now and go, all right, he ate a sandwich for lunch. No, undeniable, right? We can all say that. Now, another 100 years down the road, we see Wendy swallowed a sandwich for lunch. Does it become pretty obvious, like, okay, well, I think something's messed up here. Like, there's something a little strange, a little off. We kind of see that, right? Then we discover a little bit later, we see, we're back to Wade, and he threw a sandwich for lunch. You can kind of discover, okay, yeah, clearly this is not correct. I think we can look at the conglomeration of all this and figure out, what is this statement supposed to say? Wade ate a sandwich for lunch. Now, if we had the original document, and however you spell sandwich for lunch, okay. I don't know how to spell it. I'm a terrible speller. Thank God for spell check. Wade ate a sandwich for lunch. We knew this is the original document. We just, the author signed it, whatever it may be. And then we discover it says, Wade ate a human for lunch. What's the correct thing? All these copies that are clearly copies? Or the one autograph, the original?
The last one.
The last one seems to be, well, that's the oldest known copy, but that has a change to it, and that's totally different than all these other ones. The other ones made it a human. That's a massive difference, right?
Right.
God is so brilliant that in the formation of Scripture made sure nobody could come along to the oldest known ones and change something massively. And is so brilliant that we would have an astronomical amount of copy versus copy that have more and more and more mess ups than anyone will ever know. But that because of that, we can now figure out what the original one was supposed to say. And so we don't have a single original copy of any of these. But did you know that we have found more copies of just pastoral manuscripts where Brother Jason types out a transcript of what he preaches on Sunday on a passage in Mark's 16, whatever. We have so many copies of pastors' manuscripts that we can reformulate from the early church. We can reformulate from Genesis all the way to Revelations without ever seeing an actual biblical manuscript. There's that many copies of just transcripts of people preaching on it, let alone all the massive amounts of copies that we have of each of these that are littered with mistakes. So all those atheists are like, they're full of mistakes. You're right. Thank God. Because now we can determine by comparing them together what the actual message and meaning is. To me, that's the part where you get the human and the clearly divine in inspiration, if that makes sense.
So all the rabbis who did Sabbath preachings, they had scribes that would write down their sermons, and then those were studying that became part of the Talmud.
Yeah, yep, that's exactly what the Talmud is. Yep. So it becomes teachings and devotional writings of the early rabbis.
I think we talked about this before too, about that the Bible is like cryptic. The real story is kind of hard to see and it's for a reason. The devil would have never killed Jesus in the first place if he'd have known that was how we were all going to be saved. So it's cryptic so that everyone has a blind eye a little bit to it, but those of us that believe understand what it's trying to say.
Yes. It's the idea that if you come to the discovery of the truth through deep reflection and meditation and that kind of thing, it's going to mean more to you than if I were just to say you need to be this person, right? It forces the reader to go on the journey with and to begin to reflect on these things and how there's certain narratives and motifs and things that are playing on each one of these. It tells us it out in the open. The book of Psalms, it opens with, "Blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, doesn't stand in the way of sinners, but his delight is in the law, the teachings of the Lord, and on his teaching or law he meditates day and night." And then it's going to say he's like streams planted, But then in Proverbs 1, it's going to say the same thing. It's going to say, hey, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, receiving instructions in wise dealings, righteousness, justice, and equity, give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear, increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance to understand a proverb, a saying, the words of the wise, and it's literally in their dark things, their hidden meanings, right? In other words, like the Bible's going to say right out front, hey, it's probably not what you think it's going to be, which makes sense because when you juxtapose that with Jesus' teachings, he's going to come and go, y'all think you're good because you've got the 10 Commandments down or you can follow the 613 laws or whatever, but you've never murdered anyone. Great. Have you ever hated anybody? Yeah, now you've murdered someone. He's going to take these things that we've got figured out and go, nope, you've missed it. The rich, nope, the poor are the rich, right? The ones who will lead are going to be the servants, right? And he's going to frustrate even his disciples. His disciples are going to even make that comment that we talked about previously where he says, why do you keep teaching in parables? Can't you just straight tell us, like, okay, here's the way, Jesus, like, here's the way. And he says, I'm going to speak to you in this unclear way because one day it will become clear. And for those who will search and seek, they will find. But the ones who just want the quick way out, yeah, they're never going to see it, right? And it's been hidden from them. And so, anyways, there's a lot behind all that too. But It just makes you approach Scripture. Just for me, I've been on this journey where I'm like approaching Scripture going, okay, if the simple reading of this tells me this, I'm going to assume it's probably not telling me this. I'm going to assume that it probably is trying to teach me something else, and I need to figure out what this means, and I need to rely that God's going to, by meditating on this day and night, I will begin to learn this wisdom, instruction, understanding. And testimonially speaking, it has been that. I can go back to almost mere moments where I would sit in front of a specific passage, and it has formed every aspect of what I believe and what I teach, and I think that's because that's what this is. I mean, it's kind of like our view of heaven. So many people in the church believe heaven's going to be this, like, we're in an all-day party singing to Jesus forever on a cloud somewhere with mansions. Like, if that's heaven, that sounds boring. Like, it's like a perpetual all-day forever church service. That would be miserable, right?
I'm so used to working.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, it depends on who's preaching, right? But that's what we do. We just narrow this so down to just like, oh, well, this is a moral self-help book. If I look at this enough times, it'll make me a better person. And then we wonder why we constantly are going back and trying to like weigh our sin versus our righteousness, and it's a struggle. And we go back to church and we feel like we have to apologize to people because we haven't been here in a couple months or whatever it may be. Meanwhile, Jesus is like, nope, we've all fallen. Like, Jesus's message is, yeah, you have you have nothing. You got nothing. You're gonna die. It's not good. But then follows it up with, but I'll take care of the issue. Right? And anyways, so did that make sense? Did I confuse everybody with that one?
Well, I'm reading the Bible in 90 days, and so far I'm 21 days ahead.
Oh.
So I'm in Job now. Oh, Job!
Yeah. Let's talk about Job.
Frustrates the heck out of me.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I mean, I go, he's arguing, he's agreeing. You know, I go, what is Job?
So you're not a fan of psychology or philosophy, right? You don't have that philosophical mindset, right?
No, I don't, because I always thought Socrates and all of those people, the only reason that they got to navel gaze was because somebody was cooking their dinner for them.
Yeah, right.
You know? So, no, I don't get Job at all. I just go, what is he doing? You know.
We talked about this last week.
Yeah.
About what it represents.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole deal is, where does this fit on that timeline?
Yeah, you get stuck on the chronology, but that's not the point.
Because they say it's the oldest book.
Well, that's a myth too.
smack in the
They don't actually know. They're just guessing based off of a couple context clues. Basically, it feels like it's a pre-Israelite individual who's speaking this, but there.
I mean, I'm glad he starts out, devoted and goes through all this, and then he's restored, and I go, yay!
Right. So the premise of Job is a blameless and righteous one, right? Who is going to be tested. And in his testing, he's going to get things he doesn't deserve, which brings to mind what we feel like somebody deserves. And that's the underlying question of all of Job. Is Job getting what he deserves? Because now you're going to get friend after friend and family who are going to argue, yeah, you had to have done something. You've made God mad somehow, or you have unrequited sin or whatever. You should just curse God. You should just whatever it may be. And then you're going to get all of these different poetic responses, and then Job's going to come back, and you're just watching this man spiritually be broken and break down, and he's going to demand God give him an answer as to why he received what he didn't deserve. And God is not going to answer him. He's going to say, are you God? And Job is going to repent. Job is going to be like, okay. And the whole question is, where does this wisdom come from? So reading this through the eyes of Genesis 1 through 3, you're going to see my help comes from the Lord. Wisdom comes from God. Lamenting, it's a part of the experience. You can demand God to answer these, and maybe sometimes he'll answer those. Maybe sometimes he won't. He boldly stands before God and demands that God give him an answer for why he's suffering as a righteous individual who's done nothing. And not only that, all those around him are suffering, and he's not getting what he deserves, and he wants an answer. God does not answer him, but instead, God then doesn't also turn around and rebuke him for what he's saying. He does not rebuke Job for demanding an answer. Instead, he turns to his friends and says at the end of it, he said, the friends who said, you had to have done something. You are getting what you deserve, Job. At the end of it, he turns in verse 7 of 42. He says, my anger burns against you. And he's talking to Eliphaz the Temanite. My anger burns against you and against your two friends. For you have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now, therefore, go and sacrifice these clean animals. Skip down to the end of verse 8. For you have not spoken to me what is right, my servant Job has. Hint, 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 wink, wink. I've said this twice now, so now you need to pay attention to what he spoke and what's Job speaking, right? And then, and Eliphaz, and they do this, they did what the Lord said, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. And then the Lord restores Job's fortunes. When he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. So now you've got a picture. See if this sounds familiar. You've got a picture of a righteous, blameless one who's suffering. Yeah. It's a philosophical, if you want to say allegory, you can, but it's a parable about a righteous, blameless one who will suffer what he doesn't deserve, so that the ones who are supposedly righteous and blameless don't suffer what they deserve. Because God's ways are not man's ways. But in the end of it, we will be restored with double the portion, double the glory, double the riches.
Now I could probably get through the last half.
Yes.
Read the end of the book.
Yes.
I looked at it this morning. I'm only halfway through Job.
Man, well then you hit.
By that premise, then it didn't have it. It's a story.
But I want to be careful to say that it didn't actually happen, because the scripture does not demand.
Didn't have to have.
The scripture doesn't demand us to put it in these boxes. Because it's inspired and because it's godly, it can have both happened historically and also be allegorical. It's why we argue whether the rich man and Lazarus and stuff was a real thing or if it was just a teaching purpose. God doesn't tell us. It could have been, it could not have been. We don't know. That wasn't the point. You get stuck in the weeds there, right? And when you get stuck in the weeds, then you miss, where does he say? I thought it was in Job 13. He makes this statement in the midst of it. He says, though you slay me, my hope is in the Lord, is what Job says to God. Which, think about the implications of what Job is saying. He's saying, no, God, though you're the one who slays me. Meanwhile, does God actually slay, or does God just allow it to happen? He allows it to happen. And that's why in the lamenting Psalms where David is going to sit there and argue with God, he's going to make these statements. Here we go. Psalm 39. Tell me this didn't just show up. He's crying out to God, right? It's David. He's saying, I said, I will guard my ways that I may not sin with my tongue. I'm going to try to be good. I said I was going to try to be good. Now things are horrible. He says, as I've mused, the fire burned. I spoke with my tongue. O Lord, make me know my end. Help me measure my days. Let me know why I'm fleeing. He's fleeing, by the way, in this moment. He says, surely all mankind is just mere Abel, Havel, breath. Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely nothing, they are in turmoil. So regular, like whiny, lamenting psalm. Like, oh, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. Now watch what he says. He says, and now, O Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you. Now you're like, there's the preaching part right there. So our hope is in God. Deliver me from all my transgressions. David, my transgressions. Do not make me the scorn or the fool. I am mute. I'm not going to open my mouth, for it is you who have done it. Remove your striking of me. I am spent by the hostility of your hand. When you discipline like a man with rebukes for sin, you consume like a moth what is dear to him. Surely all mankind is breath. So now David goes, oh, it's all my fault. Woe is me. And then he goes, but you are beating me up, God. And you go, oh, that's a little, you decide to step away from him in case here comes the smiting, right? And then he says, hear my prayer, Lord, give ear to my cry and the peace of my tears. The whole point isn't what's right, what's wrong, are we getting what we deserve? God's allowing it. He's the one who's in control. And though we are being slain, whether it's him slaying us or whomever, our hope belongs in the Lord. Luckily, there was one, the Lord, who will take the slaying by the ones who deserved it so that we won't have to.
I just saw a movie about an Irish woman who just went through all kinds of heck, and she's going and talking to God and and pointing her finger and angry and then but she still communicates, and so she ends up in Vietnam saving street children. Because God had given her a dream during all her travails that she would go there, and she didn't understand it at all. But at the end, she'd been faithful in her talking. But I was thinking, she kind of sounds like Job, because
Right.
just shaking her finger at God and saying, but.
Interesting.
I'll still follow you. So,
That's
true story.
that misunderstanding that like our faith is not blind. It's not even meant to be blind. It is meant to be through turmoil and development, stronger in relationship with him. It's just like any relationship that you experience on this earth. What's going to be better in the end? Crying out, even if you're wrong, crying out to your spouse in anger and frustration or whatever it may be, or holding it all in and pretending like it's all good. Like at the end of the day, one of those experiences is going to develop a deeper relationship if you come out on the other side of that, in more honest, open communication and that kind of thing. Well, that's the same way with God. Like we are okay to say things to God that we pretend like we're not okay to say.
I think you can take it.
I'm pretty sure he can. Yeah. Anyways.
But I think as Christians we say, we're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Not a good Christian.
So true.
Not a good Christian.
That's so true. All right. We have gone way over time. For the sake of the people who are on here, I will get off here. But thank you guys for coming this week. I really appreciate it. And the 7 or 8 who've been on here this whole time watching, I'm very glad through the silence that you are hopefully still hanging in there. So otherwise, we will see you Sunday night and maybe next Tuesday. Oh, I don't know. I'm supposed to be traveling back next Tuesday. We'll see. Well, I'll see how that goes. So, hey, let me pray real quick, and then we can close this out. God, thank you for this time. Thank you for the hopefully clarifications that you were able to bring to each of us. I pray that you'll just continue to birth in us a desire to just spend time with you, whatever method that may look like, and just spend time in your word, discovering constantly just how incredible your word is. We thank you for the opportunity to do that, and we just ask that you continue to help us to be a reflection, an image, a representation of who you are to those who need it. God, we love you in your name. Amen.